Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy, and finally, I have Lisa Murphy back on. Just
Yay!
me and Lisa again.
Just me and Heather.
It does seem like it's been forever. We did a lot of panel stuff over the summer, but we haven't just done a episode with just the two of us in a long time.
And I think this will be a nice way to kick that off again.
Right. I think this is going to be a good jump back in. So we're going to talk about, it's instead of a quote, we have a very short blog post that's going to guide our conversation on this episode. And the blog post, it comes from Transforming Early Childhood Education, or Transforming ECE, I think is how you would find them on Facebook. And the blog post is called "There is no hierarchy in early childhood education." And so let me just read this quickly and then we'll jump in. I think I've noticed this for years, but it didn't really hit home for me until this week. What was it that I noticed? That in the world of early childhood education, there's a preconceived notion that there are some roles in our field that are seen as better than others. I won't go into detail with the experience, but let me say it really wrecked me. And that's sad. That's not in the blog. That's just me. Let me be perfectly clear, back to the blog. I have multiple degrees in the field of education, but that does not make me better than someone who cares for children in their home in each and every day. I will always see myself as a child care provider, because those who provide care for children are giving everything to look out for the best interest of all of our children. I'm begging each and every one of you who work in the field of early childhood education to come together and lift one another up. Please, for the love of our children, stop seeing others as lacking and instead find ways to help one another become our best selves. The end. And when I sent this to you, Lisa, I texted you the link to the blog post, and I think all you saw was "there is no hierarchy in early childhood education," and your response was, "Yes, there is," with like 7 exclamation points.
There is. And yeah, it kind of made me laugh too initially, of like, yeah, there is. Like, what's this? I got to get my hands on this. What is she talking about? I will say that I think the spirit of the blog is one of that there shouldn't be, which I 100% agree with. Mm-hmm. But like you, Heather, after 25, 30 some odd years in the industry, anybody who tries to convince me that there isn't a hierarchy, invisible or visible, mm-hmm. Either hasn't spent enough time in the industry, or is lying to themselves,
or is benefiting from the hierarchy,
or benefiting to some degree from the hierarchy. But I mean, there is, and in preparation for this conversation, I drew one out. I drew out the ladder of what I see in it, and then even how it spokes within it. Mm-hmm. If there is, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, and I'd love to get really specific and unpack it, but I don't know if we have that kind of time. But I have always felt that there's a huge difference socially, perception-wise. If you are an elementary school teacher, and mm-hmm. let's, for the sake of being clear for perhaps a new listener, early childhood education is defined as birth to age 8. So mm-hmm. that includes our kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2 counterparts, 100%. However, if I tell you socially at a dinner party, which we're not going to right now anyway, but if I was to tell you that I was an elementary school teacher, I would be received and perceived differently than if I told you that I was a family child care provider, or mm-hmm. that I was an infant room educator. And that's just the reality. I think you could spend the rest of your career picking apart and unpacking the actual reasons why. Mm-hmm. But to say that there isn't one, I think is misleading, because there is one.
Right. And well, and that's, so, I mean, you're talking about the outside perception, which is 100% relevant, and we've all probably experienced that to some degree.
I also made a list of the internal ones.
I was going to say, but I think
we do to each other.
Yeah. So I just recorded a couple days ago with Carol Garboden-Murray and Richard Cohn about her book that's coming out about the pedagogy of care, and how we need to get rid of this dichotomy of care and learning being completely different things, and one better than the other. Although I think we decided that care was better. But one of the things that came up was this sort of internal gatekeeping that we do amongst ourselves. Even if it's just a child care center classroom that has a lead teacher and an assistant and an aide, and we throw all the garbage work to the aide, and we say, or I'm a lead teacher, so I'm working the morning shift, and I'm not going to stay till 6 o'clock because I have my degree, and degrees don't stay till 6 o'clock. Apparently, that 4 to 6 p.m. time doesn't count as much during a child's day. So there's all kinds of, and then child care center versus family child care. We have a little bit of attitude towards each other sometimes, and I personally experienced a lot of Head Start versus child care program sort of hierarchy. So it's we can't deny that it's there. We can wish that it wasn't there. We can say it's unfair, but it's there.
Yeah, I mean, I was told that when I first got hired, that the reason that you're the closer when you're new is because you're new. Like, it had nothing to do with anything other than being the lowest on the hiring totem pole. And it would get, forgive me, but it would get bitchy. Like if you were there the longest, you were the first one there, you opened, and then you were out of there right after nap time was over, and that was it. And woe to anybody who challenged that. And I would even say, and this might be going outside of the actual topic that you had for today,
That's
and
what
at
we
the same
do.
time, selfishly, I've always wanted to give airtime to that. It's more of I think maybe a competition, but I think it's a competition that emerges out of that invisible hierarchy of like, well, I got all my kids to sleep today.
Yeah.
That kind of pitting each other against each other. And, it's, I don't do daycare, I teach preschool.
Right.
And I wrote an article back in 2007 called The Verbiage Wars. And I mean, that was it, pre-K, K, nursery school, co-op, Head Start, Neat Start, Jump Start, after school, school age, family childcare, family day home. We have so many ways of capturing what we do. That it sends a fragmented message, I think, unfortunately, to, like the shoot. They don't even know what they call themselves.
Right, exactly. And so how can we expect to change that dinner party person's attitude about what we're doing, or that policymaker's attitude about what we're doing, if we can't even come to an agreement that there's value in some of those jobs that are seen as lower on the hierarchy?
And I experienced it when I left. So I kind of worked my way up the ladder, so to speak, in the childcare / preschool arena. And back when I was cutting my teeth, the pre-K, I mean, you could probably have a whole separate conversation on that year before kindergarten, right? So in my brain, early childhood, as I just said, is birth to age 8, which we know that's the accepted definition. But then preschool, Lisa Murphy definition was birth until you made that transition to kindergarten. But then that year before that transition, through the time of my career, evolved then into, it was pre-K, or it was the preschool year within the preschool year. And so preschool kind of, it's like, okay, is that an age? Is it a grade? Is it a service? Right. Just the other day I posted on Facebook, what are some of the words that you've heard for that, and there's over 40 posts on the name for just that year. So I think that adds to that hierarchy of which piece of that fragment do you work with, because somehow that might or might not elevate you on that ladder, that hierarchy ladder. So like when a lot of people, like I would ask at gigs, I would be like, okay, how many of you in the room are working in a pre-K that is on an elementary school campus? And a number of people would raise their hand, and I would acknowledge that whether they realized it or not, they went up a rung on that invisible ladder, because now they're seen as a part of that elementary school campus, which still is a perceived, higher caliber or
whatever, hire something.
Hire whatever,
Yeah. I think that this really caught my attention because of, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but over the summer we saw this progression of when things first started shutting down due to COVID. Teachers were heroes, and the posts were all about how, we don't make enough money, and early childhood, is the backbone. And then as the fall came around and we were trying to decide whether we could reopen schools, then suddenly and this is all just social media reference, suddenly everything was, we can't just open schools because you need babysitting. I'm not a babysitter, I'm a teacher. And the whole thing made me rethink my own use of language, because I used to and still slip into a pattern of getting really uptight about the words you use for the work we're doing. And I've gone from really making it a big deal to call it early childhood education. And then childcare became sort of acceptable to me. Daycare, never say it. It still makes me cringe, but I'm progressing. My point is, I'm starting to decide that that was all about my own ego and what I needed from the title and what I needed from the hierarchy. And if I'm thinking about just what I'm here for and what the children need from me and what I'm really doing with my days, and try to pull my own ego out of it, then it's a whole different, then the words don't matter as much to me. And I'm not gonna say you're never gonna hear me say early childhood education, but I've gotten to where, like, even when I'm teaching these classes at the community college, I talk a lot about childcare. And some people are like, well, I don't do childcare, I'm at a preschool. But no, you're still doing childcare, ultimately.
And I think that's what I did. That was the intention behind the article that I wrote back in 2007, which was, honestly, I don't really care what you call it, because even if you are like, no, I do preschool, you're still ultimately caring for those children outside of their home space, whether that's for 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, or 12 hours, there still is an element of care. And even if you call yourself a babysitter, if you're doing it with a little bit of intention, you probably are still seeing elements of a high quality, developmentally appropriate program, whether or not you could speak to that, right? And I think that's the point that I was trying to make, is that if you're doing it in a way that is developmentally appropriate, play-based, child-centered, in the highest and best interest for the children who are showing up every day, in theory, just to what you just said, Heather, it shouldn't matter what you call it. It shouldn't matter what kind of shingle is hanging on the door, or, how you're advertising yourself, because at the heart, you like to think that people would be making those valuative statements based on actually what they were witnessing, not just on the verbiage that's on the door. But unfortunately, we know that doesn't often happen, because it'll get filtered even through not only just preschool, childcare, daycare, but also then you add the confusion of, well, we're Reggio inspired, or we're Montessori, or we're Waldorf, and now you're just confusing the daylights out of everybody driving by the building, because they might or might not know what it means. And all of your listeners, and yourself included, we all know that we have been or witnessed or observed or worked at, very highfalutin, like la-ti-da programs that charge a lot of money, that are crap. And we've all worked and done some time in some programs that might not have been in the best areas, might not have had a lot of funding, but you knew that there was good, amazing stuff that was happening in there.
And I think a lot of it has come from our desire to be respected, right? And that's kind of where we started with this. And what we've gotten to then was, okay, early childhood education, early care and education is something different than childcare. And that, I think that did damage. Like, so now it just fed into the academic push down and the sooner is better focus that we were fighting against for so long. It's another way that we've fed it instead of fighting it.
Exactly. And so we wanted to somehow be aligned with one of those identifiers that maybe was a little higher up on that ladder. I mean, it's a dated article, but she, I think it was Ann Mitchell. She was a former executive director of New York AEYC, but she wrote a really, really good piece talking about how childcare historically had been linked with, lower socioeconomic status and a need to go to work, and that preschool had this more educative phrase to it. And unfortunately, it shot us in the foot, because then people who worked in either camp, whether they realized it or not, started to get affiliated with that. So some people tried to intentionally, like, no, I want to be seen on a higher rung. And I don't know, I just think the words sometimes get in the way. Bickering over whether or not I can get a room full of kids to sleep quicker than you can, gets in the way. Whether or not my bulletin board is sexier than your bulletin board, gets in the way. Whether you're the opener or the closer, to me, that still means somebody trusted you with the keys to the building. So that, that says something regardless of how many alphabet soups, initials you have after your name,
And, we both have initials after our name. We both have degrees. I'm not saying that, but it's not automatically an indicator that you are of a higher quality
or better,
or
right?
better
Right.
when you actually get in there with the children.
Exactly. And I have seen amazing home-based programs that put the local childcare / preschool to shame in regards to cultivating relationships and rich, relevant, meaningful experiences and connections between the adults and the children. She has the bare minimum requirement of what the state allows.
Yeah.
And, and I'm not wanting to reinforce that. I'm wanting to simply point out that some of those superficial trappings or really quick observations that we might have does not necessarily guarantee quality or good program.
Yeah.
And I think we all know that, but I also think that sometimes we assume that everybody else also knows that. And I think that occasionally it's good to remind listeners and viewers that, just because they have all the pieces of paper on the wall doesn't mean that what's going on there is the best thing that could possibly be happening.
Yeah. Oh God, something was in my brain and gone as soon as you stopped talking. I was like, no, let Lisa finish. So maybe we sort of answered this in not directly, but just in the conversation we've had so far. But I guess, so what's the big deal what's the big deal about this? Why does it matter that you and I are all fired up right now about this internal hierarchy that we have and this competition between types of care? And
I think because it takes away from it moves the lens, right? So I'll quote Mimi Shenfield when she was on our podcast, the Childcare Bar and Grill podcast, when she talked about, it's a dancing reference where you have your spot and you've got the big spot painted on the studio wall. So when you're learning how to spin, you're learning how to turn, you're learning how to twist, and your eyes catch your spot, and then you flip your body, you flip your head, and you catch your spot, and then you won't fall over. And her analogy was that as early childhood people, we've lost our spot.
Yeah.
We're all over the place with what we're calling ourselves, what we're identifying as, what we're da-da-da-da-da-da. And so the light is now off of the children and the program. And I think that's one of the reasons why. I think it's time away. Like all the energy spent debating over what we're going to call ourselves is time away from deepening maybe my own practice or my own understanding of my practice. It's like a distraction tool. But to me, and I'll throw this out there, and it might be more me, I can't speak for you, but to me, it's more evidence of the inconsistency that our profession has, that we don't have a unified title of what we do. And go on.
It just seems funny to say we're putting too much focus on the language we use, and then to say we don't have a unified title. But that's the truth.
But it's the truth.
And we need to. I think there's people. Maybe I've said this already. There's people in the field, and I definitely have experienced it myself, who need to do some reflection about why, if you have that reaction when you see someone, like when I was a center director and people used to call and say, so do you teach, or are you just like babysitters? And that used to just fill me with instant rage. And I had to stop and think about, they're asking the question that they think that, with the information they have, that's what they think they need. The distinction is, those of us within the field, though, should be expected to have a higher level of knowledge about what the differences mean when we're talking about those differences, and find out what's common, and then that can be maybe our unifying language. But it's a difficult.
Yeah, I
have some leaders in our field seem to be taking us in the other direction. But anyway,
like what I would call myself if a general person off the street asked me what I did versus, the more nuanced response that I might give somebody in the profession. My own experience was one of attempting to do a little bit of real-time education when folks would ask that, when I experienced it probably firsthand, most dramatically, when I went from teaching in the center to opening family childcare. And like overnight, there was some element of Miss Lisa at the center, but then they're showing up now at my house. And it was like, anything that I thought I had kind of flew out the window simply by the nature of where the same level, if not better care was going to be happening, but the perception of it seemed to take a hit a little bit.
Yeah.
And having to have conversations about that, you know, what do you do here? And I would take the family childcare kids up to the park, and I learned really quickly just the verbiage, right? And they would say, oh, do you do a preschool program? And I'm like, well, you know, it's like I'm doing family childcare, but I've been a preschool teacher, so there's elements of the preschool in the family childcare. And they'd be, I'll never forget this. They're like, no, which one do you use? And I'm like, which one do I use?
What?
Their understanding of doing preschool was that something came in the mail.
Oh, a
Right?
curriculum.
Like a
Sure.
prepackaged curriculum. And so then I was like, no, I don't do that at all. You know, and so here then I was being exposed to a different definition of something that I was aligned with. And you're like, oh, no. For clarification, no. Nothing comes in the mail in a box from some company in the middle of the country telling me what these kids here in San Diego are supposed to be engaged and passionate about, you know?
Yeah. I'll tell you, and I maybe she'll care, maybe she won't, but Bethany Corey is one of my heroes in this aspect, in this regard, because she is one of the most intentional, mindful, intelligent child care providers, early childhood educators that I know. And she has, 4 or 5 children in her home, and she's doing wonderful things. But when you ask her what kind of care she is, she'll be like, I don't know what I do it in my home. Like, she doesn't care about the label at all, but she's doing beautiful things, and she's doing it with the specialized knowledge and expertise that the field requires. But she doesn't get hung up on it. And I really respect that, because I do still really get, ask me what I do, I'm going to give you 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
Because I still have that ego that I keep talking about with other people.
I mean, I appreciate that you're willing to say that. And I get what you mean by the ego. I think that something you said earlier, which jogged my memory of Elizabeth Jones, who said, we worked so hard in the 80s to get and the 90s to get people to see that what we did was important, that the word that you associated with that kind of became important. We're trying to tell you that what we do matters. So then, did a certain group of people decide that there's certain words to call what we were doing that were somehow better than other words that we were using? I mean, I
think they did, and I think it was us. I think it was us as a field. And I know there are even people who would say, well, you're not a field, you're not a profession, because you don't have that unification, but the work is out there. And so the word I use is field.
Yeah, I think back in the day, I would default to using the whole, if you say you're a doctor, then you're a doctor. People understand what that is. If you say you're a nurse, you understand what that is. You say you're an attorney, somebody understands what that is. When you say you're a teacher, there's
700 definitions.
There's 700 definitions, and I'm not saying that there wouldn't be specialties within the field of medicine or within the field of law. I get that as well. But I would say that in early childhood, they're not necessarily specialties. It's vernacular. What does this area call what we do? And that can change from state to state, to district, district to region to region. And I would even think, even how old you are, would determine that, or perhaps would determine the level to which you got upset if somebody called you a babysitter versus a preschool teacher,
right? Yeah, I remember moving to Indiana and working in a childcare center and calling the infant room the nursery, and no one knew where that was coming from. And I was like, well, in Nebraska, the childcare centers, that's what we called it. The infant room was always the nursery.
The nursery, yeah.
And I think regulations too, the language that's used in your state regulation, as they're defining who's exempt and who needs to be licensed and what this is, that all feeds into it also.
Sure.
So I guess,
and
what
even
we're
that
saying
is part of that hierarchy too, is even the are you licensed, are you not licensed, are you kith and kin, are you the lady down the street who's minding some children while grown-ups go to work or do what it is that they need to do, and do we see them less than, equal to, better than? I don't know. To me, the proof is in the pudding. I really, and I would be hard pressed, Heather, I'll be very honest with you, if this is something I've arrived at in my evolution, or if I've kind of always brought that to the table. I would say it was probably not until I really started doing more workshops
Uh-huh.
that I was even exposed
Oh.
to the laundry list of varying identifiers of what we do, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
I kind of came from the nursery school, childcare, kindergarten,
Yeah.
like that was what you did. And pre-cool, pre-K, TK, kitty K,
Yeah, that
kindergarten,
makes sense. Yeah.
like TK, 4K, JK, elemental PK, one,
Right.
2, 3, like, oh my
Right.
gosh, what does all of this
So
mean?
social media probably has a role too. Let's just throw them into the pile because they get thrown into every pile. But now we're just more aware of what's happening outside of our
In our
neighborhood
bubble.
and our
True,
community, our bubble.
true. I
So
think funding does too.
Sure.
This funding is set aside for children who will be 5 on or before
Yeah.
December 1st.
Yeah.
Okay, so does that mean that the people working with that group needs to be called, something different?
Yeah.
And this is what I meant a few minutes ago by if Joe Blow off the street asks me what I do, now, maybe not so much right now, because I do say now more that I'm a speaker and an author.
Yeah. Yeah.
But back in the day, I would always just say that I was a preschool teacher. I am a preschool teacher. Didn't matter if I was with the ones or blended, family child care, I would be a preschool teacher. But I actually, amongst my cohort, my peers, I started referring to myself as a facilitator of early childhood educational environments a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
But that takes too long to explain.
I think you have to explain it. Yeah.
To the lady at the grocery store, or somebody in the elevator. Also,
doesn't really care.
Who doesn't care, right? She doesn't. She's just passing the time making small talk. She doesn't even care that you're a preschool teacher. But the reason I liked facilitator was, to me, it was a little bit more inclusive of the various settings I found myself in. Like, I found that, like, I could be serving as a facilitator within a Head Start, a YMCA, a Boys and Girls Club, a children's museum, right? So that word seemed to fit what I was doing a little bit better.
I think now I generally just say, well, I work with young children and their families.
There you go.
and if they want more, they can ask for more. But being in academia has definitely sort of messed with my head too, now that I feel like I have to have this big long title and explanation of my value.
Well, and I think because of my personal bent is one of mixed age groupings, regardless of the building that it's in, that makes it a little trickier as well. If I'm out there advocating for as large of mixed age numbers to be together, not number of children in the space, but the age range of being as big as possible, as big as legally can have, then that almost requires the people working in that space to come face to face with, how have you identified, with what you do? What do you call yourself? What do you want to be referred to as when it comes to your profession?
Yeah. And and this could be a whole other conversation, but mixed age grouping is sort of trendy again now. People think that they want to try and do it in center kinds of programs, settings. And that is another level now. So now, even if you work in a childcare center, there are people who present mixed age group as being higher up on that hierarchy, and they're still looking down on these family childcare providers who've been doing mixed age group forever.
Time immemorial.
We're a mess, Lisa, and I don't know what to do.
Read Ready or Not again.
Yes. Oh God. Yeah. Because a new version came out, I think, right? A new edition, and I didn't read it because I was scared.
Well, I think I had to read the first one 5 times.
Yeah.
And write 2
Exactly.
papers on it.
Yeah. And a book report. I know I listened to a book report.
Yes, I
on
did
your
do
response
a book report on it.
before I had you on my speed dial. Anyway, maybe we should wrap it up there, since clearly we're moving on.
Sure.
Okay.
That's always a good indicator that it's
when we just start laughing about stuff that no one else cares about.
One of the things I did write down, I don't know, maybe this will.
Oh yeah, you have notes.
But I do. I always have notes. And I had to be mindful of not being overly critical of the actual words used in the actual blog post. Like I
Oh
would have
yeah, I'm not criticizing this blog post at all.
No. But I found like I was drawn to like her comment about just because I have a degree doesn't mean that I'm better than somebody working in their home. I was like, oh, I had to keep that in check because I did have a little bit of a
Sure. Yeah.
to that a little bit, because we all know that just because you have a piece of paper doesn't mean you're better, and vice versa.
Right.
But I did say that it becomes easier to stop seeing each other as lacking and to find ways of lifting each other up to be our best selves. I think when we do have consistency though, or opportunities to get to know the people in our profession who are doing it, right, that allows us to get beyond maybe what our own perception of family child care might be, right? Go meet some people who are doing it, right? Go observe their spaces. I will say, I kind of wish that she had elaborated on the experience that did bring this to the forefront in her brain, because I think it might have given a little bit of clarity or insight to specifically, like maybe even offering some suggestions on how to lift each other up. I will say that when it comes to those internal kind of nitpicky hierarchy of I can get all the kids to sleep, or I'm the opener and I've been here the longest.
She's just a closer. Yeah.
She's just a closer. Yeah, she's just a closer. But my sense of why we do that is because you don't get the financial compensation.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. So we have to, there's other unwritten forms of the compensation, right? Of status, of respect, or of prestige. And I just think it's a sad state of affairs when it's that you get to leave it to. You know what I'm saying? That
yeah, but that's the point that you've reached.
That's
the pinnacle of your
reached,
career.
you get to leave it to 30. You get a key, you get your own access to the Sharpie markers and the toilet paper, your own expense account, right? You get to spend $10 a month on your classroom instead of only $5. I mean, I have nothing to say to that other than,
it's reality.
And maybe some rationale, which maybe back in the day was done with 100% amazing intention. Like, and it could have even been intentional. Like, hey, you know what? I can still only afford to pay you XYZ an hour. And now because you've been here the longest, I can't offer you health care, but we're going to adjust your hours so you can get off work a little early and go pick up your own kids at school. Boom. Like that is to some degree a raise of sorts, or an acknowledgement of being appreciated within the job that you're doing.
But seniority is a reason, like that's a tangible rationale, a good reason to say, okay, this is something I've earned. I can feel good about that. That doesn't mean you have to say, well, you work till 6, so you're shit. Or I'm above working till 6. That kind of, it's a different, to me, it rings differently.
Yeah, I would agree.
To say that it's because you've been here a long time, because of course we have to find ways to acknowledge appreciation for the people who are doing the work, without knocking other people down on your way to do that, I guess.
True.
But that's another whole show.
It always is another whole show. It also is making me think of dispositions, right? So right, if there's an unwritten rule that the newest person on the team has to be the closer because that's just the culture of the school, whether I believe in it or not, but yet I know she's a morning person, and my opener who's been here the longest, and so that's been her reward, really should be the closer because she doesn't really wake up until 2 in the afternoon. Right. So how do I use what I know about the people working here to benefit the overall perception and execution of the program without being so locked into these outdated, models of what we should be doing.
Right.
Should, quote unquote.
There you go. All right. Well, as per usual, we said we were going to stop and then kept going. So
see, they know that now. They look forward to it.
Bonus
they're like, no, they're not really done. Yeah. They're not really done.
Yeah. It's like, they left the stage, but they're coming back out. They haven't done the encore yet. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for having me back.
Thanks everybody for listening to another episode. We'll see you next week.